The dictator's death was meant to end the nightmare. It didn't. It was just the beginning. Baghdad, 2006. A city drowning in blood. The dull thud of explosions was a daily rhythm. Suicide bombings, kidnappings, street executions. So why didn't the long-awaited execution bring peace? Because for the Shia majority, it was justice. Payback for years of mass graves and chemical attacks. But for the Sunnis, it was a political killing. A final humiliation for a community that had lost its power. The country was split, and the bill came due. Hundreds of thousands of lives lost in the meat grinder that followed. In that year alone, tens of thousands of civilians were killed. An entire European town wiped off the map. Families frantically packed what they could. They fled their homes as sectarian militias cleansed entire neighborhoods. On the streets, concrete blast walls grew higher and higher. Then came 2007. It only got worse. Baghdad became a fortress of checkpoints, a city divided against itself, and a grainy, shaky video, filmed on a cell phone, showed the world Saddam's final moments. It spread across the internet and television screens in every corner of the globe. While the world watched his death on repeat, the dictator's body was already on the move. Under heavy guard, a helicopter cut through the night, flying north from Baghdad. Destination: his birthplace. The small town of Al-Ajah near Tikrit. A simple family plot waited there. He would be laid to rest beside his sons, Uday and Qusay. U.S. forces had killed them in a firefight back in July 2003. A dynasty of violence, ending in a patch of dirt. The burial was fast, secret, done before sunrise. Headlights sliced through the pre-dawn dark as cars and trucks arrived quietly. Tribal elders, family, a few old loyalists. They gathered around the open grave, a simple white shroud, the sound of dry earth hitting the cloth. They lowered his body into the ground. But long before the burial, the world had stopped waiting for official confirmation. They were already watching him die on a tiny screen. How does a secret state execution become public property? One man with a phone, breaking every rule. A guard pulls out a cheap button mobile. He raises it over the heads of the crowd, filming the final moments. The room is concrete, small. The air is thick with taunts and vengeful shouts, echoing off the walls. This was supposed to be a solemn act of state justice, a controlled, quiet procedure. It became a spectacle of mob revenge. A shouting match over a man about to die. The grainy file was small, easy to share. Within hours, it was on the internet. From Baghdad to Washington, people leaned into their screens. This was one of the first viral execution videos, destroying the state's monopoly on the story. The footage was raw, unedited, and unstoppable. Millions of views in the first 24 hours. Those grainy phone clips captured the dictator's final walk. He entered the chamber, hands tied. He didn't stumble. He didn't lean on anyone. The executioner placed the thick, rough noose over his head. Saddam stood firm. An assistant then offered a black hood. He refused it. A simple shake of the head. He would watch his own end. This wasn't meant to be slow. It was engineered to be instant. The wooden trapdoor and the length of the rope were calculated, a formula for a specific weight. The goal wasn't suffocation. It was a clean break of the cervical spine. The time, exactly 6:05 a.m. In a moment, this heavy rope would snap more than a neck. It would snap 30 years of dictatorship. The lever was pulled. The floor vanished beneath him, a sharp, heavy crack as the rope went taut. His body jolted once, violently. Then the body hung, completely still. Before the rope snapped taut, Saddam spent his last night listening to the sounds of a city tearing itself apart. What was the morning of December 30th, 2006? The first day of Eid al-Adha, a sacred holiday of mercy and forgiveness, turned into a day of state-sanctioned revenge. In the cold execution chamber, a thick rope was already waiting, measured precisely to his height and weight. No mistakes. Sunrise was hours away. The air in the concrete cell was cold. When the guards came, Saddam was dressed in a simple dark overcoat. He appeared calm, almost resigned. Outside the prison walls, Baghdad was a war zone, a brutal reminder that this act would not bring peace. A handful of hand-picked Iraqi officials watched, judges, clerics, a few guards to manage the mechanics of death. It was not a trial of justice, it was an event. The verdict itself had been hastily concocted. The law had spoken. But what happened next wasn't about justice, it was about speed. A panicked rush to finish the job. What did the last night look like for the man who held an entire country in fear? No luxury, just boiled chicken, rice, and prayers. He accepted his final meal on December 26, 2006. A simple plate. He ate it slowly, without rushing, as if time no longer mattered. Afterwards, he spent the night in quiet prayer in his cell. He was held at Camp Justice, a cold, Iraqi-controlled facility in Baghdad. The location was a final insult. It stood in the Qadamiyya district, a Shia neighborhood his regime had brutally suppressed for decades. The execution room was small, utilitarian, cold, bare concrete walls, built for one purpose only: a fast, efficient kill. A thick rope, already tested for his weight and drop, was waiting in the small chamber. The space was not designed for ceremony. It was designed for function. The hanging platform was sturdy. The trapdoor mechanism was checked. Everything inside was arranged for a single outcome. The gallows was technically ready, with zero room for delay. That readiness had a simple explanation. The new government was terrified. They feared Saddam's loyalists. An uprising, more bloodshed. They couldn't risk giving them time to organize a rescue or a protest. The chapter had to be closed immediately. Iraqi law gave them a window, 30 days from a failed appeal to the gallows. But the new government and its American backers didn't want 30 days. The U.S. administration needed a victory to show voters before the end of 2006, a sign of progress in a failing war. On December 26th, the court rejected Saddam's final appeal. The clock started ticking. They had a month. They used 4 days. The tribunal gave its final order. The sentence would be carried out before the new year. The rush to the gallows had one simple reason. Iraq was already at war with itself. The news of the verdict hit the streets like a spark. The country exploded. Why didn't the court's decision calm the nation? Because this was never about law. It was gasoline on a raging fire. In Shiite neighborhoods, crowds poured from their homes. Years of fear under Saddam. Decades of waiting for justice after the massacres in places like Dujail. They celebrated, firing rifles into the air. The deafening crackle of automatic weapons was the sound of victory. But in Saddam's hometown of Tikrit, the same sound meant war. Sunni men filled the squares. They didn't see justice. They saw a lynching. They held his portrait high, shouting his name, accusing the trial of being a victor's revenge. This wasn't a country being healed. It was a country being torn in two. Sunni and Shiite militias were already carving up the cities, block by block. The trial only gave them a better reason to kill. In 2006 alone, this sectarian slaughter killed over 34,000 Iraqi civilians. The verdict didn't bring closure. It brought a new, brutal math. An average of 90 dead civilians every single day. The street war was already raging. The verdict of November 5, 2006 was the match that lit the fuse. For months, the world watched Saddam shout. He screamed at the judges. He called the trial a sham. But on this day, the shouting stopped. The courtroom in Baghdad was a fortress. Thick concrete walls, coils of barbed wire, a place of judgment under siege. Justice had a price, and it was paid in blood. Judges, lawyers, and witnesses lived under constant threat. Armed escorts were not a precaution. They were a necessity. 3 defense lawyers were assassinated during the proceedings. The judge spoke into the silence. Saddam Hussein, his half-brother Barzan Ibrahim al-Tikriti, the chief judge of the Revolutionary Court, Awad Hamed al-Bandar, guilty. The sentence for all 3 was death by hanging for crimes against humanity. But that sentence covered just one crime, a single drop in a sea of blood. Before the trial, there was silence. For more than 2 years, Saddam was a ghost in American custody, moved between secret bases, always watched, never knowing the next stop. His trial finally began on October 19, 2005, but the court faced an impossible problem. Too many crimes, too many victims. A lifetime of massacres, torture, and executions could not fit into a single case. So why, out of all the massive atrocities, did they choose one specific incident? Because the tribunal needed a quick conviction, something simple, something fast. They deliberately sidelined the Anfal campaign against the Kurds, a genocide that left over 50,000 dead. That case was too complex, too vast. The court needed living witnesses and a clean paper trail for a fast execution. The choice fell on Dujail. Where does a man who held millions in fear hide? Not in a palace, not in a secret bunker, in a cramped dirt hole, under a pile of trash. On the night of December 13, 2003, soldiers from the 4th Infantry Division raided a farmhouse in Ad-Dor. They found a patch of ground covered in rags and dirt. They kicked it away, revealing a styrofoam plug. They pulled it out. The smell of raw earth and rot billowed from the darkness. Out of that hole, they dragged a man, confused, filthy, an old man with a wild, matted beard, blinking in the flashlight beams. It was Saddam Hussein. The soldiers expected a last stand. The dictator, pistol in hand, ready for a final battle. The reality was just squalor. He had a pistol, but he surrendered without resistance. Quiet, defeated. The man whose gilded palaces occupied entire city blocks had been living in a space the size of a coffin. A spider hole, 2 meters deep, with a crude pipe for air. The hunt was over. But before that hole in the ground, there were months of running. The start of a massive, paranoid hunt. The algorithm was simple. A whisper in a village. A raid hours later. An interrogation. Overhead, the constant, maddening hum of American helicopters circled Iraqi villages. Day and night. There was no quiet, no escape from the noise. The ministries in Baghdad were empty shells, but the hunt in the provinces was total. The U.S. Army called it Operation Red Dawn, a name taken from a 1984 action movie, but this was no fiction. Thousands of troops scoured the country. Armored vehicles rumbled through dirt roads. Intelligence teams worked around the clock. They carried a special deck of cards, 52 faces of the regime's most wanted. Saddam Hussein was the ultimate target, the ace of spades. With every raid, his world shrank as his aides were captured, one by one. His bodyguards were arrested and interrogated. But that manhunt came later, before the spider hole, before the interrogations. Saddam wasn't hiding. He was on a pedestal, towering over the city. April 9, 2003. Baghdad, Firdas Square. An American tank rumbles into view. A thick chain is slung around the neck of a giant bronze statue of the dictator. The tank pulls. The statue lurches. And then it crashes, face down in the dust. The crowd surges forward. A symbol of total power, now just scrap metal. They climb on it. They stomp on it. They beat the bronze face with the soles of their shoes. A dull, metallic clang with every strike. The ultimate insult. The end of an illusion. How did the empire of fear collapse? In just a few days under tank treads and a hail of missiles. On paper, the Iraqi army was one of the largest in the Middle East, a force built over decades, hardened by propaganda. The reality? It dissolved in 3 weeks. The capital fell. The portraits were torn from the walls. Government ministries stood empty. The crowds that smashed his statues had a reason, a deep one. For them, the terror began on July 16, 1979, the day Saddam Hussein took absolute power in Iraq. His face was inescapable. Portraits in classrooms, offices, on every street. His voice filled the airwaves. You were taught to praise him. You were too afraid not to. For 24 years, one careless word meant prison, torture, or death. It wasn't just you. Your family could also disappear, without a trace. While devastating sanctions choked the country, the dictator built more monuments to himself. He survived wars, crushed uprisings. His security forces were loyal. His network of spies reached into every home. To the people of Iraq, his fall wasn't just unlikely, it was unthinkable. But Saddam wrote his own death sentence decades earlier. July 1982, 148 men and boys were executed. An entire town was methodically broken, its future erased. The crime? A few seconds of gunfire. The town was Dujail, 50 miles north of Baghdad, a quiet farming community, mostly Shia, deeply distrusted by Saddam's regime during the brutal war with Iran. His motorcade was passing through, hot asphalt, a silent street, then the dry crack of bullets against his armored limousine. Bodyguards shielded him instantly. The attack was over in moments. Saddam wasn't hurt, not a scratch. But the insult was a mortal wound. So what exactly did the dictator pay for on the gallows? He couldn't forgive a scratch on his ego. The response wasn't a police action, it was a cleansing. Hours later, security forces flooded Dujail. They smashed down doors in the middle of the night. Men, women, and children were dragged into the street, mothers screaming as their sons were pulled away. No one knew where they were going, or if they would ever come back. The sham trials were a formality. No lawyers, no defense, just predetermined verdicts. But the revenge didn't stop with executions. Before the end, Saddam's men bulldozed the town's date palm groves, the source of their livelihood. This wasn't just punishment. It was a slow, deliberate starvation. 148 men and boys were condemned to die. 148 unmarked graves.